Welcome back, everyone. Tom DiNapoli, sworn in as the Comptroller of New York State in 2007 and has served in the Assembly before that for 20 years. As Chief Fiscal Officer for New York, he acts as the sole trustee of more than $147 billion common retirement fund. And he's kind enough to join us now to bring us up to date on the finances of the Empire State. As always, Tom, I appreciate a few minutes.
Yeah, good to be back.
Well, overall, I was there when then Governor Patterson laid out a very draconian picture for what the finances of New York looked like. We certainly knew when Governor Cuomo laid in that he said tough times were ahead. The governor has said that he'd like to put on the table something probably resembling pretty similar 401k plan. You're not too crazy about the idea.
Well, I'm not crazy about substituting a defined benefit for 401k. I'm in a 401k myself. They can be great as a supplement to a pension for retirement security, but I think the experience, especially during the Great Recession, has been that so many folks that only had a 401k that they were counting on in addition to Social Security, much of that value got wiped out at the peak of the market meltdown. A lot of folks who are about to retire still haven't retired. Some folks that had been retired had to go back to work in their 70s and their 80s, and people living longer. And if people aren't prepared for retirement, especially with the changes in family structure, you know what happens down the road? People are going to turn back to government. For retirement security, I think a 401k option just doesn't make any sense as a substitute for a defined benefit pension.
I always thought it's a tricky spot for lawmakers with statewide positions in New York when it comes to Wall Street, because while it's a blue state and messages of equity here and closing gaps between have and have-nots are certainly popular messages, at the same time, you guys, especially you, can do the math, and you know how important Wall Street is to the overall health of the state. Look at the prism through J.P. Morgan. You got people saying, hey, these guys haven't learned their lesson. And Jamie Dimon's lecturing everybody about backing off of Wall Street after what we saw 4 years ago. And now we get a $2 billion mistake here, if you want to call it that. That said, how much regulation that isn't on the books do you believe we need to police folks that obviously have proven they can't completely police themselves?
Well, your premise is the correct one for New York State. Very important part of our economy. High-paying jobs that benefit everyone, not only in the New York City metro region, but really the entire state.
Bonuses for Wall Street folks are good for the New York bottom line here. I remember a few years ago how much of a herd here, and then Governor Patterson said, it's the bonuses. Without the bonuses, they're the shortfalls, and maybe the public doesn't want to hear that, but that's part of the economic reality, right?
You're absolutely right. Wall Street revenues accounted for about 20% of the revenue coming to the state prior to the meltdown in 08 and 09. Now it's more like 14%, but it's still a big driver for the state and the state economy. From my point of view, the move for greater regulation and oversight at the federal level makes sense. And I do think, and we're all trying to understand what's exactly involved with the J.P. Morgan situation. I'm not even sure the folks who were doing those trades and investing fully understood what they were doing.
Not to interrupt you, but isn't that part of the problem?
Exactly.
I mean, look at you. Nobody knows the finances of New York State, honestly, better than the guy sitting across from me. But people can't really explain credit default swaps or derivatives. It's like Sanskrit. And part of the problem is you're having trouble regulating it because people can't really understand it.
Right. And everybody seems okay with it when it's making money. And then when you have a $2 billion loss, or it could be more. But to me, that emphasizes the need for there to be an appropriate level of regulation and oversight. And what we've seen as the markets were starting to come back, a move from some in Washington to pull back on Dodd-Frank, the Volcker rule, all these things that we read about, much of which hasn't been implemented yet, still in the regulatory process of being implemented. So I think this is a clear message that we should not retreat from having appropriate regulation. Just to your point, it's so opaque right now. We need to have a more clear understanding, more transparency. That will promote more accountability. So I certainly think we need to monitor what's happening with J.P. Morgan, big employer in our state.
Sure.
We have a lot of pension fund dollars invested there. We want them to be successful. But I do think it is a loud call to the SEC, to regulators in Washington.
Are you confident enough with J.P. Morgan that you're going to leave New York's holdings there as it relates? I mean, obviously there's a big financial interest for New Yorkers. It's currently constituted. You see anything to change that?
Well, we're a long-term and a very patient investor, so we're certainly not going to jump just because there's a a headline problem right now.
You like casinos for New York? Do they end up bringing jobs at the end of the day, or is it really You look around wherever, you see a lot of empty gaming tables here because there's so much more competition than there was 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's here. And that's one of the big questions.
They're talking about obviously expanding it significantly.
And other states are as well.
Yep.
So I do think that, I don't have an answer to the question on anybody does. We'll all be studying it. Are we just competing against ourselves within the state or competing against other states for a finite amount of money that's available for gaming? And I certainly don't want us to get to a point where as a culture, as a society, we encourage gaming as a way to have government achieve revenues. New York gets a lot of revenue right now.
So you like it or no?
Personally, it's not my thing.
Yeah.
Other folks seem to like it, and the genie's already out of the bottle, in many ways. So I don't think we're not going to have it. I think the question is going to be how far do we want to go. But I don't think we should do it with the notion that this is going to be our magic formula to solving budget problems. I think that would be a mistake if we start building our financial future on an expectation that gaming is going to save the day for us.
All right, before I let you go, you saw what the Assembly did, and now the Senate's reluctance to take up minimum wage. $7.25 in New York. They're talking about making it $8.50. In a minute, I'm going to bring on Michael Long at our table here, and you know what he's going to say. What do you say? You
look at the competition question. We're behind Massachusetts, Vermont, Connecticut. We have a lower minimum wage than those states. So I certainly think it is reasonable for us to raise it. And nobody's making the case, wow, because we have a lower minimum wage, we're getting so many more jobs because of it. I think in the past when we've looked at this question, we've not seen the job loss that has always been predicted. Other states have moved in this direction. I think it's reasonable for New York to move in the direction. I'll leave it to the legislature to figure out what the right dollar amount is, but my guess is there'll be some positive resolution on this question by the time the session is done.
Elected 18 and still at it. I won't say how many years later. Tom DiNapoli, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
Thanks.